I come to the floor today in order to continue the efforts started right here earlier this week, efforts by the women of the Senate and the men who support the Violence Against Women Act to bring a simple, straightforward message to our friends in the House of Representatives. Stop the games and pass the inclusive, bipartisan Senate VAWA bill without delay. The Violence Against Women Act is a bill that has successfully helped provide life-saving assistance to hundreds of thousands of women and families. It's a bill that passed the Senate 3 months ago today by a vote of 68 to 31. It's a bill that has consistently included bipartisan provisions to address those that are not being protected by it each and every time it has been reauthorized. But here we are, back on the Senate floor, urging support for a bill that should not be controversial. And just as we did on Tuesday, just as we're doing today, and just as we're going to continue to do in the coming weeks, we will be making sure this message resonates loud and clear, both here in Washington, D.C. and back in our home states, because we are not going to back down. Not while there are thousands of women across our country who are excluded from the current law. In fact, for Native and immigrant women and LGBT individuals, every moment that our inclusive legislation to reauthorize Violence Against Women Act is delayed is another moment they are left without the resources and protection they deserve in this country. Mr. President, the numbers are staggering. 1 in 3 Native Americans, women, will be raped in their lifetimes. 1 in 3. 2 in 5 of them are victims of domestic violence, and they are killed at 10 times the rate of the national average. And these shocking statistics are not isolated to one group of women. 25 to 35% of women in the LGBT community experience domestic violence in their relationships, and 3 in 4 abused immigrant women never entered the process to obtain legal status, even though they were eligible, because their abuser husbands never filed their paperwork. This should make it perfectly clear to our colleagues in the other chamber that their current inaction has a real impact on the lives of women across America affected by violence. Women like Deborah Parker. Deborah is the vice chairwoman of the Tulalip tribe in my home state of Washington. Mr. President, Deborah was repeatedly abused, starting at a very young age, by a non-tribal man who lived on a reservation. Not until after the abuse stopped, sometime around when she was in the 4th grade, did Deborah realize that she was not the only child suffering at the hands of that same assailant. At least a dozen other young girls had fallen victim to that man, a man who was never arrested for his crimes, never brought to justice, and still walks free today. All because he committed these heinous acts on the reservation. And as someone who is not a member of a tribe, it's an unfortunate reality that he is unlikely to ever be held liable for his crimes. Mr. President, reauthorizing an inclusive VAWA is a matter of fairness. Deborah's experience and the experience of other victims of that man do not represent an isolated incident. For the narrow set of domestic violence crimes laid out in VAWA, tribal governments should be able to hold accountable defendants that have a strong tie to the tribal community. Mr. President, I was very glad to see Republican Congresswoman Judy Biggert and several of her Republican colleagues echo those sentiments last week. They sent a letter to Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor. The Republican members explicitly called on their party leadership to end this gridlock, and I quote, Senate-endorsed provisions and accept the Senate-endorsed provisions that would protect all victims of domestic violence, including college students, LGBT individuals, Native Americans, and immigrants, end quote. So today, I'm here to urge Speaker Boehner to listen to the members of his own caucus and join us in making a major step to uphold our government's promise to protect its people. People like Maribel, and Maria, 2 more young women who come from my home state of Washington. As a transgender woman, Maribel has been subjected to random acts of violence by family and boyfriends and strangers. She has been mugged and attacked on the street. She has suffered broken bones and cuts and bruises. She's been raped, and she was left for dead. What Maribel said to me was deeply concerning. She said, "Not once have the police ever conducted an investigation, much less shown any concern for me. Rather, my experience with law enforcement is one of harassment and abuse. I've been ostracized by family and friends, and in fact, it is one of my first memories," unquote. She experiences hate daily from those that think she has no place in our society. And then there's Maria. Shortly after her wedding, Maria's husband became a different man, she said. His abuse ranged from emotional to physical, and on 2 separate occasions, he held a knife to Maria's throat, threatening to kill her. He constantly threatened Maria with deportation back to Jamaica, and eventually he refused to attend the interview with immigration authorities necessary for her to obtain a green card. So her application was denied for lack of attendance. She was angry and scared, but she found the courage to ask her husband for a divorce. In response, he raped her. Maria moved out of the house, and though her husband repeatedly tracked her down and assaulted her, to save her own life, Maria fled to Seattle with her 2 young children. Mr. President, it does not have to be this way. You know, I was so proud to have been serving in the Senate in 1994 when we first passed the Violence Against Women Act. Since we took that historic step, VAWA has been a great success in coordinating victims' advocates and social service providers, law enforcement professionals, to meet the immediate challenges of combating domestic violence. And along with its bipartisan support, it has received praise from law enforcement officers and prosecutors, judges, victim service providers, faith leaders, healthcare professionals, advocates, and survivors. Violence Against Women Act has broad support for one reason: it works. Where a person lives, their immigration status, who they love, should not determine whether or not perpetrators of domestic violence are brought to justice. These women cannot afford any further delay, not on this bill.
Would the senator yield for a question?
I would be happy to yield to this.
I think the senator from Washington has made an extraordinary presentation in terms of outlining the facts with respect to the abuse that women face. And having done a series of forums around my home state, and as you know, in our part of the country, in Washington and Oregon, you know, many, many small communities, 10, 15,000 people. It's my experience, and I'd be interested in getting my colleague's assessment since she's been our leader on this, is without the Violence Against Women Act, it's my understanding that women in rural areas who face the kind of brutal treatment you've described would literally have nowhere to turn. That the Violence Against Women Act, for women in rural areas in particular, is sort of the last line of defense between them and the abusers. Is that my colleague?
I would say the senator from Oregon is absolutely correct. If you have been beaten and abused and you feel as a victim of violence, you have nowhere to turn, especially in a rural community where everyone knows everyone and you don't know who to turn to. There is no place to go. The Violence Against Women Act provides you with the support of law enforcement officers and advocates so that you can get out of a very abusive situation.
Well, I'm going to listen to the rest of my colleagues' remarks, and I'll have my own. But I just want to thank her for her leadership. I think this is such an important issue. This isn't about dollars and cents, and it's not about politics. It's about doing what's right in preventing violence, and I commend my colleague for her statement.
Well, I thank the senator from Oregon, and I would just say I know he's going to speak in just a few minutes, but I know that he spent a great deal of time going around his state and listening to some of these women who had been victims of domestic violence and knows personally from their stories how important it is that we cannot continue to delay this over some called blue slip. It's not about a blue slip, it's about doing the right thing. We have overcome the blue slip issue time and time again for issues like FAA and transportation bills and many other pieces of legislation because it's the will of the body to do so. So to tell a woman in rural Oregon or Washington State that this bill can't happen because of a blue slip, ridiculous. They've been told that they can't get help for a lot tougher reasons. Let's not let a blue slip be the thing that comes between them and the support they need. In fact, I would say to Senator Oregon and all of our colleagues, on Tuesday, the New York Times ran an editorial on just this that really gets to the heart of it. They said, and I quote, "House Republicans have to decide what is more important, protecting victims of domestic violence or advancing the harsh anti-gay and anti-immigrant sentiments of some on their party's right. At the moment, harshness is winning." But the editorial also echoed our sentiments that it does not have to be this way. It pointed out that, quote, "On May 15th, Senate Republicans joined with the chamber's Democratic majority to approve a strong reauthorization bill." And it ends with what we all know will take to move this legislation forward: leadership from Congressman Boehner. And so, Mr. President, today we are here on the Senate floor to make this effort and to call on for the same thing: leadership. It's time for Speaker Boehner to look past ideology and partisan politics. It's time for him to hear the stories of women across America who have not had the protection of this bill, and to make a major step forward that will assure that a woman, no matter where she lives or who she is, will have the protections that this great country can offer. So thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I thank my colleague from Oregon for his real passion on this issue and understanding, and for taking the time to hear from women and men who've been impacted.